Kia ora koutou katoa. G'day everyone. Thank you very much for coming along today. Apologies for the delay. The Tararua District have also declared. We wanted to make sure we had as up-to-date information for you as possible before we came today. As you are aware, Cyclone Gabrielle has had major impacts across most of the North Island. This is a significant disaster with a real threat to the lives of New Zealanders. Today we are expecting to see more rain and high winds. We are through the worst of the storm itself, but we know that we are all facing extensive flooding, slips, damaged roads and infrastructure. Accordingly, on the advice of NEMA, I have this morning at 8:43 a.m. declared a national state of emergency. It will apply to the 6 regions that have already declared a local state of emergency, that is Northland, Auckland, Tairāwhiti, Bay of Plenty, Waikato and Hawke's Bay. This is the 3rd time in New Zealand's history that we have felt it necessary to do this. This is absolutely not a reflection on the outstanding work being done by the emergency responders who have been working tirelessly, local leadership or civil defence teams in the affected areas. It is simply that NEMA's advice is that we can better support those affected regions through a nationally coordinated approach. Since Sunday, NEMA have been in close contact with local civil defence teams of affected areas to assess the need of a declaration of a national state of emergency. NEMA have been giving advice to myself and the Prime Minister on the need of a national state of emergency based on the assessments of the local teams, and until now the advice has been that it was not necessary. NEMA met with the local civil defence teams earlier this morning and advised that local civil defence teams also fed back that a national state of emergency would be beneficial. This declaration enables the government to support the affected regions, coordinate additional resources as they are needed across multiple regions, and help set the priorities across the country for the response. A national declaration is a significant legal instrument, and it has been important that it has been prepared correctly. This declaration gives us the ability to give further resources to affected regions. I want to emphasise that the government has already been surging support and resources to the regions for some days. Our message to everyone affected is safety first. Look after each other, your family and your neighbours. Please continue to follow local civil defence advice and please minimise travel in affected areas. If you are worried about your safety, particularly because of the threat of flooding or slips, then don't wait for emergency services to contact you. Leave and seek safety, either with family, friends, or at one of the many civil defence centres that have been opened. I want to thank everyone who has stepped in these really difficult circumstances. We are seeing iwi, community groups, and many others opening up shelters, providing food, comfort, and support to so many people. And again, I just want to acknowledge that the tireless work of the responders who have been working night and day to help keep those communities safe. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that there have been reports of a missing firefighter, a volunteer firefighter, who is a professional and highly trained but left their family to work for their communities, and the search continues. Our thoughts are with the FENZ staff and their families. I'll now pass on to Acting Director of Civil Defence, Roger Ball, to talk through what the state of national emergency means going forward.
Thank you, Minister. Tēnā koutou katoa. What we know is, as the Minister has said, that we have declarations of states of local emergency in 6 regions: Northland, Auckland, Tairāwhiti, Bay of Plenty, Waikato and Hawke's Bay. And the Tararua District has also declared an emergency for its area. We also still have multiple weather warnings and watches in place, and unfortunately the effects of Cyclone Gabrielle will continue to be felt throughout New Zealand through today. NEMA and the National Coordination Centre operating beneath the Beehive has been in close contact this morning with Civil Defence Emergency Management Groups and with emergency services. Based on that, my conclusion and the conclusion of us all was that a national state of emergency should be recommended to the Minister. The declaration covers the 6 areas or regions that I mentioned, and now with the declaration from Tararua District, they will also be added. If other areas or regions declare in the coming hours, we'll add them to the national declaration. Under a state of national emergency, myself as the Director and my National Controller have authority to direct and control the response under the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act, including allocation of resources and setting priorities. We'd like to emphasise that the government has already been surging significant support and resources to the regions for many days. This declaration won't change the ongoing role of Civil Defence Emergency Management groups and agencies to do their jobs locally. But what this declaration does give us is the ability to set overall intent and to respond to multi-regional needs, to allocate critical resources in a coordinated manner across the country. It will also, I hope, provide public assurance that national authorities have this and no effort will be spared. It's not our intent to start micromanaging the operational response on the ground. We continue to have confidence in the Civil Defence Emergency Management groups, in the emergency services and in the responding agencies to do the job in support of their communities. We are also hugely appreciative of the efforts of volunteers, NGO groups, iwi, marae networks and indeed the public for their support to date. What do we need you to do? If you're feeling unsafe, there are a number of civil defence centres that are open and you can go to those and find the information on your local civil defence channels. If you're relocating, let your friends and family know what you're up to. In impacted areas, if the advice is to stay at home or to minimise travel, please follow that advice. Drive to the conditions. Watch out for flooding and debris on the roads. Do not enter floodwaters. Do not play in floodwaters. This is still an unprecedented and dangerous weather event. Don't take chances. Please keep up to date with Met Service weather warnings and advice from your local Civil Defence Emergency Management group. It's important to stay informed even if your power is out. Radio New Zealand is the civil defence broadcaster and is available on AM and FM frequencies. Thank you.
Happy to take questions.
What was the event that tipped it over for you in terms of the recommendation for a national state of emergency?
I'm happy to take that one, Minister. So, not a particular event, but I would say that this morning when we conducted our engagement and consultation with the Civil Defence Emergency Management groups and also with the agencies present here in the National Coordination Centre, and they include Police, FENZ, NZDF and many others, our assessment was that the cumulative effects of this event required a recommendation to the Minister for a state of national emergency.
And are the resources, for example, like the military, can you deploy them under the national state of emergency? Is that the sort of power that you need?
Yes, that's not quite right. We can still deploy those resources and have been proactively for many days now. Those resources are already out in every single region and quite significant numbers, especially in Auckland in recent days.
Are there any resources that you couldn't deploy that you can now, or is it more that coordination effort that is the important bit?
It is more the coordination effort and more the efficient allocation of resources according to priority needs.
Are you satisfied with the speed at which this national state of emergency has been declared? Would it have been useful if it was done last night or overnight, for example?
It's a pretty high bar. You'll know that it's only happened twice before now with Christchurch earthquakes and of course the COVID response. The criteria is in a large part assessing the local responses, the resources that they have, and also the resources that we have provided them over the last few days, and whether there is a benefit to coordinate that response at a national level as opposed to locally. The assessment was, and the advice that I received this morning, was that we are now at the point where that would be beneficial to all those affected regions if NEMA was able to assist with coordination at a national level. It's not a case of resources. The message has always been very clear to those affected regions. Tell us what you need and we'll get it to you. And that's the process we've been following, and that's the process we'll continue to follow under the national state of emergency.
Were you pushing for that to happen last
No, they understand that the process is pretty straightforward, really, is that this isn't the sort of thing that we want politicians to be doing without sound advice. It is significant. It is a significant legal instrument. And so on Sunday, I asked NEMA to provide the Prime Minister and I with regular advice as to whether it was needed, so that we were in no doubt as to the state of play. And at regular intervals, we received advice that it was not needed. This morning, after meeting with local civil defence officers, the advice was that it would be likely required. Once we received the advice, I signed the paper.
When it comes to coordinating those resources, is there any area in New Zealand that is particularly lacking at the moment that you can immediately divert some resources to?
I think what I would say is that the situation's really evolving even minute by minute. We've got self-evacuations at the moment and formal evacuations underway in the Hawke's Bay, and they have reached out and asked for additional immediate NZDF support, and that is being provided right now. So that would be a good example of where the difference is being made immediately, given the situation there in the Hawke's Bay.
No further information is available. The search continues, but we don't have an update beyond that. It's obviously a very distressing situation for all involved and for all of us. The country relies on volunteer firefighters. There isn't a region in the country that doesn't have volunteer firefighters. And for me personally, I've found this quite distressing also, having a connection to the fire brigade previously. And I just really feel for their family, who they left to go and help their community, and now they're looking to find them.
Was there any thought to, and I don't know if this would change the way your response works, just putting the North Island in a state of emergency and not the South Island?
Well, the South Island isn't under a state of emergency, so it might be a national state of emergency, but it's limited to those affected areas. That was exactly the same with the Christchurch earthquake. So whilst there was a pretty clear area where that was affected by the earthquake, it was a national state of emergency, but outside that area, they weren't under that. So we can reassure those that aren't specified in this declaration, they are not currently under a state of national emergency. But as regions declare, they are likely to be included in this. So Tararua declared as we were coming down, they're not technically part of it, but they will be once we sign the required papers.
Do local states of emergency no longer take effect, do they, once the national state of emergency is in place?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, those local controllers and CDM groups continue to have, the authority to do what they need to do, but from a legal point of view, the state of national emergency comes in over the top.
What are the requirements now in terms of Parliament? Are there any legislative things that you need to do? What's the process now from here?
I'm required to make a statement to Parliament, which I will do so today. I had intended to make a ministerial statement today anyway. Well, that will be included in this, and other parties will have an opportunity to respond.
But it doesn't need to go through the House, or it doesn't need to be passed. This just happens automatically.
The national state of emergency has been declared.
Under the Act, you're able to make statements and directions now. Are you going to make any in relation to this, or are you going to let the local teams just continue on?
I think that we will be in close consultation with them about what their needs are, and if there is a need for the National Controller to set any direction and intent, and I'm sure that will probably happen at a general level, then that will happen. But we just need a bit of time to get ourselves organised and also understand what that effect is that we want to see on the ground, that we can make a difference nationally.
What could that look like? I mean, what would such a statement of intent be?
Well, I think it goes back to what is the purpose of us declaring nationally at this time, and it is around that coordinations, providing that coordination between the groups and all the agencies involved at a national level, and thinking about, okay, where is the need, where is the priority, and if we do need to allocate or reallocate resources, what is our decision around that?
And the Defence Forces, suffered great attrition and is sort of like, has deficiencies in its capability at the moment. Are you reaching the limits of their capability? Are you coming up against resourcing issues with the Defence Force at all?
NZDF have been extremely cooperative and are fully engaged in supporting the efforts of the CDM groups, and that's been going on for some days. I can't speak to their operational limits or not, but all I know is that they have let us know that they're in this with us, and they will be there for the groups.
The Minister of Defence and I have been in touch quite regularly over this period, and every application or request for assistance from NZDF has been fulfilled, and at no point has it been indicated to me that there's concern around allocation of resources to the need.
What's the latest information that you've got around forecasts in terms of, is there any other patterns like what we're seeing with Cyclone Gabriel coming our way? How long might people have with a good stretch of weather to actually get some recovery underway? Have you got any updates on that stuff?
Well, the brief assessment is that the worst of it has passed, but there's still serious. And so, as we saw with Cyclone Hale, is that we thought it had went out to the east and then it stung back and hit the coastal communities of Wairarapa. So we're still monitoring this incredibly closely. With the level of flooding that's happening and the high chance of additional landslips, many areas of the country is saturated. It won't take much rain to cause some issues. So whilst they might look at the forecast and see that things are starting to clear up, we're still urging people to take this very seriously and remain vigilant.
And you're not aware of any other particular cyclone or weather pattern like this headed in this direction anytime?
I haven't been briefed of that, no.
So what would be
You're
the advice?
also the Minister for Rural Community,
Mm.
and the Polynesian Bay Tarawhiti residents who are reporting slashes again coming down and exacerbating the flooding. Why hasn't anything been done about that? It's been an issue there for years.
Yes, it has. I've spoken to the Minister of Forestry about that and he is looking into it. There's no doubt that that is an area of massive concern for that region, and I think the Minister of Forestry has indicated a willingness to look into it and see what might be able to be done. But it is of real concern that every single time there's an event like this, that seems to be a factor that is particularly affecting that community.
Is Parliament going to be adjourned after the ministerial statements this week?
I understand that conversations are underway between the Leader of the House and other parties. I'm not too sure where they've landed in that. That may well be where it comes, but I imagine that Minister Robertson will make an announcement about that.
How long
In light of your statement that the worst has apparently passed, what is your advice to people that are maybe on those coastal areas that have already faced some erosion? Is it still stay put, or?
Well, the advice remains the same until it's otherwise. And so, you know, we still encourage people to keep up to date with announcements, to keep up to date with Met Service, with their local councils for local roads, with Waka Kotahi for state highways, but more importantly, their local civil defence outfit who will be able to offer advice. We've been encouraging people, if they feel unsafe, to evacuate. That advice still stands. We've been encouraging people to listen to official guidance from Civil Defence. Again, that stands. So whilst technically the worst may have passed, it's still an area of concern. We still want people to be vigilant and please follow advice.
The text alert that went out to evacuate residents in Muribai last night, was that timely enough?
Well, as Roger's outlined, is that up until now and ongoing, the local groups will be responsible for decisions in their area, but now that the declaration's happened, NEMA will be able to give more of a coordination and supporting role. They did that when they deemed it to be necessary, and so we've seen absolute commitment and dedication from local groups, making the right decisions for them. Personally, I think that's the strength of our civil defence structure in New Zealand, is how localised it is, because they know their areas, they know what's at risk most in severe weather, and they make their calls accordingly.
You've both given reassurances to local civil defence agencies that this isn't the national management coming in and micromanaging it. Was there any pushback from those local civil defence agencies that they didn't want the national safety emergency?
Roger, you were involved this morning?
Yes, so we talked to those Civil Defence Emergency Management groups this morning, and there were a range of views, but it was clear to us, based on the overall assessment, that a national emergency would be beneficial to the overall effort. It would be fair to say that not everybody needed it, but certainly there were a number that did, and consulting with others here at the National Coordination Centre, it was our overall assessment that a national state of emergency should be recommended.
But you did get that feedback from some of those local agencies that they didn't want sort of the national agency coming in.
I think what I would say is that in each area the situation is slightly different, but it was very clear that a number of them did require that or request us and supported the recommendation for a state of national emergency.
It's also a case that we're talking about civil defence professionals here, so they understand the distinction between a regional declaration and a national declaration. They know that in making this declaration, we're not saying, right, that's it, we're taking over. They just know that if they require additional support, it's easier for us to give them that.
Are there any areas of particular concern at the moment, or that you're worried about getting resources to, that you're struggling, that you're going to have to put some focus on?
Well, the honest answer is there's various areas of concern. I mean, the reports that came in overnight were deeply concerning. Reports around Hawke's Bay, Tairāwhiti, Coromandel in particular, but certainly not exclusive to those areas. I think emergency services in the first instance are working incredibly hard, but we do understand that with the unstable ground, the floodwaters, closed roads, etc., it's making their job incredibly difficult. The options that would be available to them normally, such as helicopters, may not be possible with the extent of the weather. So there are definitely areas of concern. However, there's no concern in my view around getting resources where it's needed. For example, this morning there was a request from Hawke's Bay for additional resources. They made that declaration early this morning, and as we speak, those resources are on their way.
What about people without communications? You know, we've got some areas blacked out. Can you just speak a little bit to that, and you know, anyone who do have communications and can still hear what's happening? What's your message to them about what resources are there and what help's available? Well,
the likes of Tairāwhiti, for example, is a good case here. The power has affected the mobile towers, and therefore communication is very limited. NEMA's been in touch with the local civil defence through satellite phones, and so in turn they've been able to get us important messages. We've been able to hand that over to Radio New Zealand and other radio outlets, because AM and FM, and in some cases, AM certainly, but in some cases FM is still reaching those areas. And up until this point, we'd been advising people to have a battery-powered radio, and if they can't get one, to use their car radio, that if the power and mobile coverage does go out, then they can still get the important information through their radio.
I'm sorry if you've already said this, but how long does this national state of emergency last for, or is it by a case-by-case basis you determine each day?
It's 7 days,
yep. And
then just like a local state, and then that'll be reviewed closer to the time.
Minister, are there any back-of-the-envelope calculations on the cost of all of this? Is there a cost associated with declaring a national state of emergency?
Not necessarily. In reality, declaring probably will mean more resources because it'll be coordinated at a national level. But to be honest with you, we're not really too concerned about that. If the regions need it, we'll make sure we get it to them. And look, the honest answer is it's not going to be cheap, but that's not what we're worried about right now.
What's the latest with Hawke's Bay in terms of trying to get those extra resources in there and evacuate people? Can you give us the details there?
Look, at a very general level, so what they've requested is NZDF support, including NH90 and additional Unimogs, and that's being provided and coordinated. I couldn't go much further than that just at the moment. We just haven't, been able to talk to. Well, I haven't been able to talk to them in the last sort of 30 minutes or so.
Do you know how many people they're trying to get out?
Look, I couldn't give you that information just at the moment, but we can get that for you straight away.
Can you go into some details about what the actual efforts are like to get to some of those truly isolated communities, like Muriwai? We can't, there are no road, there's no road access, we can't get helicopters in, some of the areas on the east coast. So can you just run through some of the details of what those operations are actually looking like and how we're managing to get to those areas?
I can speak to that at a fairly general level because, as you'll appreciate, we've been concentrating on preparing for this state of national emergency. Those operations, and this will continue to be the case, will be run locally and regionally, and they'll be run by first responders in the same way that they were before the state of national emergency. So I think there are probably 4 priority areas that I can think of nationally just at the moment, and it would be that Muriwai area, it would be the situation in the Esk Valley and Hawke's Bay, it would be Tairāwhiti because of the Waipoa River and the fact that comms are really disrupted there, and we're also aware of evacuations occurring in Dargaville. So, but that's not to minimise, what's gone on in other parts of the North Island. There were quite a few hundreds of people evacuated from the Potiki area yesterday as well. And and in Auckland last night, people had to get out of a building in the CBD, which is deemed unsafe, and they had to be relocated to emergency accommodation in the dark of night. So, you know, there's a lot going on, but we will not be anticipating micromanaging those individual cases. That will still be for local operational commanders using their authority, their delegation and their resources, and we'll support them.
Had there been too much resource sent to Auckland because of the recent flooding and were regions struggling?
No, I don't think so. The general approach is to send the resources to meet the need, and so Auckland had been making various requests. We've been reminding them throughout and engaging with them around what possible resources are available if they wanted them, and then they'd make a request and we'd meet that. But so too have other regions, and at no point have we said we can't do that because Auckland's got it. Opotika's a perfect example. The NZDF forces were there ready to go when they made the preemptive declaration. They were able to assist in the evacuations there, and that wasn't at the expense of any other region.
And in terms of the search for the firefighter, are you seeing USARA?
I'm aware of the search ongoing. I read a report that they were involved, but I just want to make sure that that's accurate.
Look, I think we'd probably leave that to FENZ. The USAR capability is a FENZ capability, and I think it's probably appropriate for them to comment on how the operation's being managed.
Fair call.
Just yesterday you mentioned in the press conference that there were concerns around farmers and milk and what was happening there. Have you had any information from Fonterra or the likes in terms of how many farmers are impacted, how much milk is being tipped, and what the situation is there?
No, I've asked my team to follow up on that, but I haven't received that information yet. But as a general rule, I've found Fonterra and other companies to be really proactive in that regard. I just think back to the Rye Valley recently in Nelson, where there were a number of farms that were cut off by road closures. Fonterra said to them, dump your milk, you'll be compensated, don't worry about it. It's the last thing they need to be worried about now when they're concerned about their farm and animal welfare as to what to do with the milk. So I expect Fonterra to be just as proactive in this instance.
Minister, just going back to what you said before about having a battery powered radio or getting in your car. I mean, we live in a world where we've got information and do loads of things on our phone. For disaster management in New Zealand, is it the case that every household should have a battery powered radio?
Yeah, it's certainly something that in the lead up to the cyclone we've been encouraging people to have, but I also note that it's actually not that easy to find these days. It's the sort of technology that when the power goes out, it's vital, but in peacetime, if you like, it's not really used. And so you go to a hardware store, it's sometimes difficult to find. So you're right that it's instances like this that really do give us an idea of the sort of things we will need to be prepared for disasters. But that's also why we've advised to use the car radio as well, because if the power does go out and you haven't been able to find a battery-powered radio, you've still got that as a backup. But it does touch on, despite the technological advances that we've had, they all require power. You know, you may have got a charged mobile phone, for example, but if you've got no power to keep it charged, that'll eventually run out, and ultimately it falls down to this. It does also show that the importance of radio frequencies in emergency management. For example, we found resources recently to ensure that an AM mast that was otherwise going to be removed in Northland stayed, conscious that the push is to move more towards FM frequencies, but AM reaches more isolated communities. And purely from an emergency management perspective, we wanted that AM mast to stay there. Well, the power went out in Northland, and those communities, the sole source of information they had was AM frequencies. So I think at a broader view, we've got to see all technologies lined up alongside each other and what role they play in an emergency response.
So can you articulate just how much we don't know about the situation in Flood
Like I said, NEMA is in close contact with the local civil defence, but it is only through a satellite phone. And one thing I've learnt since coming into this role is that satellite phones are actually quite dicky, and they depend on certain circumstances to be able to work, and bad weather is one of those circumstances that can make that difficult. But I'm pleased to say that they've at least had regular contact. So important messages from Tairāwhiti have been getting back to NEMA, and then they've been using the resources available to them Is there any specifics, Roger, there that you want to get into?
Yeah, I would just add a comment, Minister. I mean, I think it is a good question, and when we made the assessment at about 8 a.m. this morning, that was definitely one of the considerations. We don't know what we don't know, and we felt that we had some blind spots, especially when it came to Tairāwhiti. So, if we're thinking about the distinction between early this morning versus last night, that's definitely one of the considerations that we took into our decision making.
Can we say that NEMA has less oversight of what's happening in Tairāwhiti compared to Hawke's Bay and Coromandel, or has that been addressed?
I think you can say that communications are severely disrupted and the telcos are making it a priority to get those cell phone towers up again. What I can tell you is that we have satellite phone connectivity to the local Civil Defence Emergency Management Group and a regular schedule with them, and our FENS colleagues also have satellite connections. So, we're able to discuss with them what their needs are and what the situation is.
Are any of those regions short of emergency management staff or first responders because they've been deployed up to Auckland to help out there?
Not to my knowledge, but if it turns out to be the case that any of those CDM groups require support, we've let them know that they should request that to us, and we will do our absolute best to get them help. We are currently mobilising personnel and resources from the wider public sector to support us here at the National Coordination Centre, and I imagine that will spread more widely into the response and no doubt recovery efforts as well.
And I'm not aware of any requests for additional resources that hasn't been able to be fulfilled, and so we would reiterate our message to any affected region: if you need something, let us know and we'll do what we can to get it to you. Sweet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.